log him in, but okay. Yes, ready? Okay. All right, the McHenry County Technical Advisory Committee for June 10th is, we'll start with calling roll call. Let's see who's here. Steve Bicking, not here, his alternate as well. Mike Von Bergen and Chris Dahm, I don't see them. Al Schmidt and Thomas Rose. Mike Warner.
Here.
Jody McCarthy.
Here.
Ryan Valesky.
Present.
Bruce Meyer.
Here.
Zach.
Here.
Dan Ziller and Seth. Scott.
Here.
Spring.
Here.
Ernest.
Here.
Darren is here on the phone. Brad.
Here.
And then I don't see Tyler Wilkie. All right, so we have a quorum. We'll move on to item number 2 on the agenda, minutes approval from our March meeting. Open it up for any discussion on minutes or entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Jody, second by Ernest. Any discussion? All right, all in favor to approve the minutes?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Any public comment? Nope. Any members' comments? Anything from anybody?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
do.
Sure.
I would just say that the workshop that you guys put on was excellent.
Thank you.
And Brad's presentation was awesome too, so all of them were.
Yeah, we had him bring it all home, so.
Yeah, it was really good.
Well, thank you for attending and thank you for the comments. We had, just for the record, we had about 70 people in person for our workshop and about 150 people online. So it really was very well attended.
Yeah.
Training is now required as part of the new MS4 permit. And part of our goal of putting these things on is we don't have the funds to run the MS4 program for all the municipalities. But doing these types of programs, we're able to provide opportunities for training and meeting your requirements just using staff time.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll see, have another good program next year. We're going to be focusing on monitoring for next year's program, and we're gathering up our speakers already for that program next year. Thanks, Mike.
Anyone else? Hey, Steve. That's okay. You're here and present. You didn't miss much. Okay. With that, then we'll move on to item agenda number 5, the SMO amendments. In your packets, I tried my best to eliminate kind of the gray box on the right. So I apologize. It's just working within that review system. There's probably a lot of other issues. Sometimes when I enter information, it will like renumber or, so if you find something, I'm sure it's chock full of that. But so some of this is new, some of this is revisiting. A lot of it is trying to tie everything together. And then we did kind of cut it off at a certain point because we thought it's a lot of information. We do want to get your feedback before we kind of continue rolling along with it. So we're going to start here in the ordinances with the application submittal requirements with the wetlands. So we came in to clean this up a little bit in terms of the jurisdictional determinations. The county previously had a PJD program in connection with Army Corps. Army Corps said, hey, we're not going to do those anymore. Lake County was doing the same thing. Lake County basically went through the process and got to a point where Army Corps was comfortable with what they were doing. So we just took that and are implementing the same measures. So what we've added here is that essentially if understanding that jurisdictional determinations can take a long time, folks can come in for the McHenry County preliminary jurisdiction. That is solely through spring. So even if you're unincorporated or incorporated, if you want a PJD, the SWCD website is updated. So you would submit an application directly with Spring's office to complete that. So if anybody's calling and asking questions or anything, we did have it on our website. We've taken it down to eliminate any confusion. So that is a small change there. And then we modified the additional language here for no permit letter, as the Army Corps has changed it. For that jurisdictional wetland component, and then a permit from the USACE for jurisdictional wetland. So a couple of tweaks here, just with some of the Army Corps changes, just to clean that up. So if there's any comments, otherwise I'll just kind of move through that. And again, all of this, I do want to preface that if you're seeing something and doesn't have a red line, it doesn't mean that staff is like, hey, we don't want to change this section. It just could be that we haven't gotten to it yet. More importantly, in some of the later sections, and I'll let you guys know. So if you did have some issues with certain sections, by all means, bring it up. We can certainly discuss and take a look at it. But that was just kind of the first piece there with the wetland components. So then we're going to jump straight into Article 6, which is the basically we're now directly looking at requirements, and we're starting off with the runoff rate reduction. So right off the bat, and you know, it might make sense here to jump around a little bit for me so I can give you guys an idea of why we're making some of the changes. But we highlighted here right off the bat the stormwater attenuation requirements as opposed to storage. So the background behind that, and we tried to, again, catch it everywhere. So if we missed it somewhere, again, you know, that will get modified. But the idea behind that, and jumping through, is, as you guys know, we've been looking at what is the trigger for detention and working through that. So a lot of this hasn't changed, but where we did start to, and this is where I'll jump around a little bit, where we did start to make some changes was the whole aspect of the allowable release rates. And as we've discussed previously, we wanted to implement other green infrastructure. So the way that the ordinance reads, a lot of it you can see is related to runoff rates and storage volume. And so if we're going down the path of allowing the rain garden and other green infrastructure, then you're not necessarily talking about storage volume, although it can be a part of that. And so calling it stormwater storage, that's why we're changing it to attenuation as a way of reducing, you know, flow or magnitude. You know, that's kind of the idea behind the verbiage, so that it flows together more smoothly. And we just felt that was a better term, but if someone has, you know, as we go through it, if we want to change that or revise that, that was the idea behind the attenuation component. So, and feel free to stop me at any time, otherwise I'll just kind of keep going. And I know everybody's getting their coffee, and you know, wheels will start turning here. But so just a quick recap here: the 20,000 square feet, making it a half an acre, just to be a little bit more consistent with other ordinances. We're changing the way that we approach detention to allow a property owner to have up to 10% of their property as impervious, as long as they satisfy A here, which is that you're not changing the existing drainage patterns. You are discharging to a channel, and I don't think I included the definition of channel here for you guys again, but that's just a stream, creek, ditch, swale, something that's meant to take water, a culvert that is designed for that. So if you're sheet flowing onto a neighbor's property, then you're not going to satisfy this condition, and you may need to make some adjustments to your design, but that's the idea there. And then we're demonstrating minimal flood risk through the idea of not increasing more than 1/10 of a foot the water surface elevation in that downstream channel using what we're calling the county simplified method, which I provided a definition in the packet, and if you guys want, we can jump to that. But it's either that, or you're using an engineer to show that 1/10 of a foot increase, and that's compatible with FEMA, and then some of the calculations that we've been running. So I guess I will jump to that simplified definition, which is page. And then, sorry if you go backwards. That might be the best. Page 20 of 23 in your packet. So we decided to put it as a definition. This can all come into the ordinance, but we thought maybe this works better. And as a reminder, this is basically, again, you're demonstrating analysis using the rational method to demonstrate proposed flow has not increased water elevations by more than 1/10 of a foot within a channel. The method is defined by the following. So rational method obviously uses Q equals CIA. So it's just defining all of the different parameters. For the coefficient, something that we discussed is using curve numbers, and the table that is provided. Oh gosh, this came up. Okay, so after that, we provided just a simple curve number table for now for discussion purposes, and then a curve number to C value conversion that we discussed last time. Again, all of these numbers can be modified, but then this way people are going using the curve number. They can obtain that runoff coefficient value and be able to carry out the simplified method. So you're just running through the calculation, and then as part of this, we took a look at running some models to see how the flow changes in a pipe flow and a channel flow. And what we were seeing is that 1/10 of a foot increase, and this is based on the pipe flow would be a 24-inch culvert, and then the channel I think was 3 feet wide at 3-to-1 slopes. But I can get those standards, but it seemed like everyone was comfortable with that. And so a 1 CFS pipe in pipe and 2.25 CFS increase in channel flow would be the target for achieving that 1/10 of an increase. So, and then the future goal for this is to have the tools available where people can click, grab tributary areas, plug it in, and it all just kind of runs. And so, so I'll pause here in terms of the setup. As I mentioned, we put this in definition as opposed to in direct language, just because this gets wordy. This felt like a smoother way to do it. And then again, these appendices, obviously curve numbers are up for discussion, just meant to be more symbolic placeholders, not that, we can adjust these. And then again, the curve number table with the C values, the rational method using percentage of the storm that runs off. This is purely based on, if you have a curve number of 100, you're getting the full runoff, and so then it's just getting the ratio, essentially, which is what the runoff coefficient is. So, any comments? I can scroll around for now, or I can continue. Yes,
Can I
Brian?
just make one statement about the
Make
channel?
as many statements as you like.
Channel flow, and I don't want to be like the boss of it, but if you want to have natural channels, maybe you want to have a velocity check in there somewhere.
Okay.
So that it doesn't get to be an erosive problem.
And there might be a section in here that talks about velocity requirements, so it might be covered, but it still not.
Just double check that.
Right.
So you put a lot of effort into that analysis to come up with the pipe and the channel changes using a set geometry.
Yes,
So,
which we can modify.
well, what I was gonna say is that when you compare those two flows, to get the 1 CFS or the 2.25, there's a percent change of the flow. you know, so maybe it's, I don't know, 5%, 10% change. Would that be something that would translate? So let's say if people have different geometries or
Right.
different pipe sizes,
Right.
if you go with a percent instead of a flow value, would that cover, you know, different
broader-
shapes?
It might.
Yeah.
The one thing I forgot to leave out is you're using the critical here, so you are running all storm events and making sure that none of them have the 1 CFS or 2.25. So that is something that is not written in here. That was something that we discussed.
Yeah.
So I will write that in, and then I don't know. That's a good question.
So like the A might be 5% and B might be 10% or something like that.
Yeah.
And that would give you a wider range of different geometry shapes.
What I can do is, we can take a look at 12-inch, 18, 24, and just kind of hit them for you guys. And we can take a look at what the percentages are. Because I do like the idea of trying to capture as much of it as possible. In some cases, you guys as the engineers are gonna need to come in because the simplified method is gonna show that increase, but you know, I demonstrated in one of the examples with a large enough swale, you know, that's a case-by-case basis that can be demonstrated. So it's still, you know, the simplified method is just kind of the quick and easy version, are we there? And then the engineering analysis can come in and clean that up, almost like a BFE determination, where you can use the overtopping, or you come in and you do that analysis if it helps the design.
Does it state in there that it's critical duration, or is
No,
it
it
assumed?
doesn't, and that was something that should be in there, that it's using when you're analyzing for the intensities. I think that's probably where, I don't know, I gotta go back and rewrite, but it should be based on using critical duration. So you're getting that highest flow comparison between existing and proposed. Or it can be written that you know, there should be no increase across the entire, you know, rainfall distribution. I don't know, that one is, you're probably looking at the peaks there anyway. If the peak works, then all the others should work. So I can write it both ways. Maybe I'll stick with the peak critical duration events. But yes, that was missed, so. And then this is something that someone can also, I know there was a lot of discussion for, you know, kind of the unserved part of the population where hiring an engineer for their project is gonna kill their project and things like that. So this would fit along the lines with someone submitting for a permit determination. We would go through and figure out what the detention is, what the max impervious is by running this method, or at least let them know that under the county simplified method, you can get X amount impervious tops. You know, if you hire an engineer, it might be a worthwhile endeavor because you might be able to bump that up based on just the geometry that we're using is based on the standard, you know, 3-foot, 4-foot white swale, whatever it is. This might be a 20-foot white swale, so. So that'll be a service that we can provide that I think hits that check mark of, you know, especially from some of the board members, of having a way to limit the amount of hoops that the ag community has to jump through. So this gives them an opportunity to just submit for that, provide us information. We can give them a letter back that they can then also use to work off of. If they do want to go to an engineer, then that should also help smooth that process out so that that engineer also isn't like throwing extracurriculars on it. Believe it or not, we see that. Not accusing anyone here, but so. And I guess, does anybody have any input or direction on curve numbers. I know we're using the TR55 and, you know, we're gonna dig into it. We've had some discussions and things like that, and it's not easy. And I think at some point, we just make some decisions based on what makes sense, right? But for the most part, the idea here is why we have existing versus proposed is that in the proposed conditions, even if you're vegetated previously and you're vegetated after, you do have some compaction potentially if you're grading in those areas. So it accounts for that compaction, some of that loss in storage, potentially infiltration, so you get a little bit more runoff would be the idea. Darren, yes.
Is that, so then the difference between existing and proposed is a reflection of the soil, hydrologic soil group changing?
Not necessarily the hydrologic soil group. We took C and D values, so your existing would be more of a C value and your proposed would be more of a D value. So we're kind of saying, hey, we're gonna be a little bit more conservative, not let you do the A and the Bs, go to the Cs, and then the idea is after construction, because of compaction and some of those factors, you're maybe operating closer to a D. Whether or not that's true, you know, that might be on a case-by-case basis. I mean, we're certainly not saying that happens with all development, and some contractors do a better job of that. But if we're gonna release something, it makes it, we'd have to define some parameters if we wanna open it up to all the hydrologic soil groups. And it goes back to some of the discussions about engineers, you know, if you give them an A choice, well, they're gonna try to go with that A choice. And so, you know, strike that balance, if you will. Now, if we feel, you know, we don't have to necessarily say, well, we're just gonna go with the C group. For some of these, we can go somewhere in the middle or shift it, you know, and part of the discussion with Scott is this brush component. Does it have undergrowth or does it not? Those are two different things. So we do need to drill into this a little bit more, but it was just kind of, if we want to do something, I would like to have something simple like this where you have, you know, if we add 4 more or break some of these out, you know, we have a dozen different ground cover types that we feel good with. Whereas the TR55, I don't, you have like over 50, or I don't know what the number is, right?
So would the intent be that if somebody was doing this analysis and they looked at the soil maps and it said they had A soils, which is, there are A and B soils in McHenry County much more than there are like in any other county actually. Then would they still go to this existing, or would we let them use that A curve number for this particular land coverage?
I mean, I'll open that question up to the group. I guess we can say no to that outright and just say, hey, we want to be conservative here in terms of our stormwater design. Or we can say, we can have an explicit exemption and say, if you can provide us the whatever information we want to see, then you can use an A soil type, and then you would have to potentially have like a third column for that, let's say, as an example. So
is this table required to be used then?
that would be the idea. Instead of going to the TR55, is we clean it up, we simplify it, and kind of eliminate, you know, 50 choices down to 12, which makes more sense in the end. And then, you know, or however we want to do it.
Is this only for the simplified method though?
No, this would be for, you know, running your detention, head grass, across the board, yeah.
See, I guess that's where it kind of concerns me, because I think if we're digging into models, like I can see a lot of people manipulating these to benefit them and have less detention than required. Like, say wetland areas. I mean, most wetland areas are you know, open water, right? So I think a 50 is very, very low for, you know, I've never used a 50 in a wetland area. So that's one of those that, I don't know. If this is for the simplified method only, I could see using it, but I guess I have a hard time just giving everybody that's running models this kind of blanket thing where we're guesstimating between C and D and trying to pick, pick numbers. I don't know, I'm just not comfortable with that for the larger, bigger developments that are gonna have models run. If this is guidance for people who just need to run quick numbers without an engineer, okay.
Yeah, and Jody, to your point, I mean, yeah, the numbers are just there for reference. They're not necessarily, I mean, there is no wetland number. You're basically, I can pull up the tier 55, but there is no compatible for a wetland
Oh,
number.
you're not getting rid off a wetland, right? A wetland's a depression. Marsh.
Potentially, right, so there is some justification there for maybe going to a 50. I mean, again, we just kind of, pick the number to more or less drive discussion, but maybe be in the ballpark if we want to. So I think, I would like to have something like this as opposed to the tier 55. They're doing the same thing. I think we're just taking some of that, I don't want to say flexibility, but idea that engineers are going to go to that table and try. I mean, I don't know, I haven't done too many reviews recently, but in the last few, I certainly had to battle that. I mean, there was an engineer that chose a curve number of like 40 in an area that's just like, and they did it because they're trying to reduce their depressional volume that they're gonna have to compensate for. And so if we're going through that routine anyway, then let's just cut that process out and just, hey, here's our numbers that you need to use in McHenry County. And so if we want to bump, again, and I'm okay with going to a more conservative approach for the wetland area. If we think that 50 is maybe it, but we want to go to maybe a 60, I don't have any issues with those approaches. If we want to try to make exemptions for having enough information, whether it's the soil atlas or saying, hey, if you're out there, I mean, they're probably getting boring samples, whether it's for their building, their septic system, or whatever, then maybe those soil classifications, maybe we say with soil classifications, these can be reduced to A or B groups or whatever it is. I'm comfortable with all of it. I just want to find the right approach that fits us, and again, has that consistency so that you guys as EOs also aren't put under a situation where someone's coming out, well, the EO over here used a curve number of X, now you're making me use this, and it's the same situation potentially, right? And that's what tends to happen if you have too many choices as well. So I do want to drill down on the numbers and find that comfort level, but if you guys are okay with simplifying it, then we can continue the discussion. Mike, sorry I cut you off.
No, I think there's precedent that if you have a qualified soils scientist that says, hey, this is the soil that's on site, like you said, with borings. You said soil classifications, but I think, it needs to be somebody with credentials that says, like, hey, this is this type of soil, and then they could use it. So if that's your exception, you would say something like, if, qualified soils scientist or geological engineer or whatever, determines that soil classification is this, then those can be used. Is that what you're talking about?
That if we want to do that, yeah. To
Okay.
allow for the situations where you might be in more A soil and you want to take advantage of it. I mean, I get it, that is a benefit to the site and is going to impact the design, and at some point, I don't want to take that out because it helps applicants and maybe reducing their construction costs and how much attention they need to take advantage of those features. If it's out there, by all means, I do want them to have the ability to take advantage of it. And so maybe there is that way to do it, of providing the soil classification from a soil scientist, like Bob Oja does that all the time. They go, usually it's 12 feet deep, and gives nice classifications with kind of literature ranges on what to expect from an infiltration rate. So we can even go to that step of if you're in certain ranges, and we touch on that when we get into some of the infiltration discussion. Normally what we see is either the classification where it gives us a range. So a lot of the times what we say is, as long as the range is that 1/2 inch or greater, we'll say, okay, you're gonna get infiltration here. If you do some type of permeable system, then we can call it pervious. But if you're gonna go and use it for design criteria, then we do want you to do the infiltration test so that you can use 0.75 or 1 inch per hour exfiltration in your system to account for that to get the most accurate high water level possible. So we already are doing that, so I'm okay with having something like that in here that allows people to take advantage should they wanna get that information, or they're already going out and doing it for a lot of these sites. Even, your small homeowners are potentially getting that information, so. Ernest?
A couple of things, just so there's some logistics that you understand.
Okay.
The soil scientists currently do it primarily for health. I mean, that's the reasoning. And if you have a larger site, let's say somebody's gonna do 40 acres, a surveyor is supposed to set up a 200 by 200 grid, soil scientist pops holes. The theory being, okay, we're using the Lake County 40,000 square foot acre, which isn't, it's 423560, but anyway, they play with it and say, okay, we caught one every acre, and then the soil scientist is supposed to go in, and if there's a difference between two of those borings, do more borings, however many, could be 10, could be 1, to say, okay, this is the magic line. That's first thing. So if we're going to start involving, do we need to set up a gridded system? And before you more to think of, they don't specifically rate it for an infiltration. They rate it for up mod, low mod, mod, rapid, very rapid. So unless there's a conversion factor that you go, okay, if he says up mod, it's this much. If he says rapid, it's this, or she, sorry. And so if you start tagging in soil scientists, you may have to make up some rules, kind of like what health has. And one more thing, Bob Oya is no longer with them. Bob Oya is now over at Raber's. So when you looked at spring, I was like, Bob Oya, wait,
I worked with Bob for-
Bob's there.
I have had conversations, but no, I agree. I figured that's where it would go. So if we want to have a percentage coverage, the majority of it, however we want to do it, we can certainly put those parameters in place. I don't want to make them too restrictive. I also don't think that, I guess I would be comfortable with accepting data from the soil scientist classification. I guess we can have a discussion on whether or not we think that's adequate for these purposes. But yeah, I think there's a pathway to incorporate more with those ideas. We have thought about that. Obviously, we haven't written that in. It's all good discussion before we I don't want to get too far ahead, then we have to come back and you've spent time and resources down a path that, we don't have agreement on. You and Darren, who wants to?
Go ahead, Scott.
Just, what we have on this page here is focusing on land cover and land use versus soils. But now we're talking more specifically about soils. So I'm a little confused how the soils and the cover play together. And I guess part of the reason for doing this is to simplify and provide continuity, even so that you can compare one project to the next easier, or to enable a property owner who may not have the technical skills to do a complex analysis to do it at lower cost. I guess it wouldn't be difficult to write into it that this would be standard practice, but allowing for more complex analysis to be done. And that would make it hard for cheating to occur, because it provides added focus to that more technical review. But I'm kind of curious how soils and land cover in this example would play together in the same sandbox.
Anybody else wants to tackle that one, or Darren, do you have something to that effect?
Sure. I mean, I'll comment on that, and then I'll ask my question too. So I think what we're trying to get at here, Stoyan, is runoff volume. Calculating runoff from a site, correct?
Yeah.
And so one method to do that is the curve number method, which we're looking at here. This is a part of the curve number table. And the curve number for a site directly Essentially, it tells you how much runoff, how much infiltration there is into the ground, and how much runoff, the volume of runoff from a site. But there are two things that go into a curve number. The first one is the land covers, and the second one, an important part of it, is the soils. So if we're looking at curve numbers, part of that equation is looking at the soils. Inherently in a curve number, to determine what a curve number is, it's looking at land cover and then soil type. And soil type is either A, B, C, or D.
Right. And I think what we can do is that, like I said, right now, the existing is primarily based off C soils, proposed is D. We can have an A and a B based on getting additional information that might be acceptable based on the discussions.
And that was actually my question was, getting that additional information. So typically in a stormwater submittal for a site, if we were gonna have them determine the curve number, they would go to the NRCS website and download the soils data and determine the curve number, the soil component of the curve number using that information. Would we allow them to do that here, or am I hearing that we maybe make them go an additional step here and get a soil test to do that?
I think that's what we want to try to answer.
I would propose that we be consistent and allow them to use the NRCS soil mapping to determine the soil type for the curve number. That's just my take.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I think it just, we did that already, so in submitting that, then they can provide that information, drop their tributary areas, and we can require them to take the average. If there's 2 or 3 that are overlapping, then they would need to analyze that and come up with a composite. Based on that, right, you have X amount of B, X amount of C, X amount of D on the average, and then there you go for that tributary. Yeah, I'm okay with that. I just want to try to trim it down and indicate, and we can, instead of existing and proposed, it can be C, D, A, B, and we can still have all 4. But I still do want to, I guess, from the choices, the amount of ground cover type choices, I would like to at least simplify that. So, yeah.
Coming at this from someone who's not an engineer, I think all this discussion is really helpful in terms of if you want to go more in depth, but I appreciate and do like the idea of providing something like this that's more on the conservative side if someone wants to use a simplified method. So I think you could say, hey, if you want to use a simplified method, get this done quick and easy, here are your numbers. If you want to invest more time, effort into this, here's another route. And I just wanted to flag that because I think we've left that behind as to whether or not this would still be available for a simplified method for someone who doesn't have the time or resources to get that additional information, to just go in and say, yes, this simple project I want to do is going to meet these, I don't have to do any more work, go ahead.
Yeah, I do want to keep it. I think my only thing is I'd like to make it available for both from a consistency perspective. I don't want to have 2 sets of curve number tables. But yeah, I'm more aligned with that idea, and then we can have a caveat that someone that wants to do a more robust study can go grab the soils or do borings, or if they don't agree with the NRCS map and the owner is convinced that it's sandier soil, then sure, go pull that extra information that's available.
Good.
And we can work off the best information available. So if they want to use NRCS, then we'll call that. If they want to go get soil borings, and that's consistent with just in general with what we do. And so I feel like that's what the group wants to do, if I'm hearing it correctly. So I think what we'll do is maybe we'll come back with a different version of this that incorporates some of that, and go from there. If that works. Now, I don't know, one thing we didn't touch on is this conversion table, which I brought up previously. which again, the C value here is just the ratio of the storm that's gonna run off. So that each curve number, you know, at 100 in the 24-hour event, you get 8.57 inches of rain, you get 8.57 inches of runoff. So at a curve number of 90, you get 86% runoff essentially. So it's just a direct translation of that. So if we feel good with the curve numbers, that should then be able to be used in the rational method. And then we would set up a spreadsheet for anyone to be able to come in, punch in their numbers, and it's gonna have this conversion table in there. So all you have to do, and we can have a drop-down menu of ground cover types, so the person doesn't even have to know, or you can manually punch in the curve number that you want if you're an engineer, because you're gonna have the backup data or whatever it is. And they can fire off the results. And that's the motivation from us too. If we get a lot of these submittals, that we can turn them around quickly as well, using the same methodology so that there's consistency. Also for the EOs, there's consistency there in terms of everybody doing the same thing across the county, so.
You said it really eloquently about, you know, the CN chart being used for like the fast track method. I couldn't have stated it better myself. I guess my concern is it being used universally for modeling, because I think when you're modeling, there are so many other considerations. It could help or hinder, right? Like I would never allow 80 on parking lot islands that are small. Is too conservative, they're gonna jam pack them down and put gravel on them anyway, right? So, but at the same time, they may have a site that has more, you know, sand, and then they might be able to benefit from that. So I guess as soon as we put that in the code and don't say that it's only applied specifically, like required for the expedited method, it's gospel. And then we as EOs have to have that argument. Like it might simplify things for others, but in some ways, as soon as you put that chart in there, it becomes well, this is what the code says, you have to follow it, you know, you're being unreasonable. So that's my challenge, is when we start going into the modeling, if this chart is in there and it applies to the modeled results, then we as EOs are kind of held to it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess on the flip side, do you want to use this, or do you want to use the full TR55 table?
So for this, I think this is wonderful for the expedited method. I totally get what you're trying to go for, quick and dirty calculations. I think if they're gonna model it and they're gonna put the time and effort, they should really use the TR55.
Yeah, again, I'm not, that doesn't go away by using that table, it just simplifies the TR55. I mean, and I don't mind going through the TR55, but I can guarantee you right off the bat, there's probably a dozen that you're never gonna use anyway, that you wouldn't allow anyway. So I just wanna try to go through and remove those so that you don't have to deal with that. So in a way, what you're saying, I wanna try to do this to simplify those efforts as well. So it's not only to simplify, but also on the back end, when you are getting those calculations, you feel confident that, okay, we went through this process, we eliminated all the ones that people shouldn't be using, and now it's just a more clear-cut version of that. And there's still gonna be issues where they're gonna still probably try to use, you know, in those parking lot islands, well, I'm using native vegetation because that's what I'm putting there. And then you're still gonna have that, and you're still gonna have the opportunity to say, no, you're gonna be closer to, you know, an 80 or whatever it is type of thing.
So you're still gonna be fighting people about their values that they put into.
Probably.
Yeah.
You know, I mean.
But you're reducing the number.
Right.
Right, you're reducing the number of options that you have to deal with and fighting engineers on, you know, this ground cover type or that ground cover type. I mean, the big one too is like on the ag side, there's like, I don't know, 20 different options. Like, do we really need 20 different, and you know, I'm speaking more to you, Bruce, but you know, crop residue, not crop residue, terrace, and all this stuff. Like at the end of the day, is it just 2 that really make sense, or do we really need, you know, a dozen for farm fields? So, and that's really the purpose behind this. So I do want to try to make it easier for you guys, and it doesn't, you know, if the person is running a model, these numbers are coming straight from the TR55 anyway. So it's not, you know, I'm not, and we can make some adjustments to that as we see fit, so that it gives you better credibility of, well, this is what we want in parking lot islands, right? We can have that in here, for example, and then you're not getting questioned. It's in there. It gives you that ability.
Just a side comment, question. You know, the simplified method, so there's, does this table go away? Does this appendix go away? The detention volume versus percent impervious? Is that just gonna?
Yeah.
You're gonna have to delete that then, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because you're using these tools.
Right, okay.
Yeah, that's out the window essentially. So in the past, and that is the motivation for the simplified method, because for engineers, you guys had that chart to give you an idea that you can give feedback to your clients, so that you guys had an idea when you're evaluating 2, 3, 4 sites, whatever it is, without getting too much into the weeds of the calculations. By having these spreadsheets and these simplified methods that you can then, again, plug and crunch similar type numbers. You're still gonna need to get your impervious percentages and all of that stuff, but now it just gets imported into a spreadsheet, gives you a breakdown of where you're at, and you're able to, you know, figure that out. So I am mindful of that if that's going away, to still have those tools available on the engineering side for planners and things like that. I do think it's important. Have not flushed that out, or there's been zero effort gone into that, obviously, until we feel, you know, comfortable moving forward, but we can start to roll some of that out, so you guys can take a look, see if it works, play with it, that type of thing, break it, you know. But yeah, that chart would go away, and then we would replace that with some tools to kind of still give that ease and that ability to run some of that analysis, provide some feedback to your clients, or whoever that's looking at a piece of property. That's the idea behind it. So how about we go and we'll make some changes here, and we'll incorporate all of the comments that you guys had, and we'll come back. And I'm sorry, I just realized in the packet it got cut off for you guys, numbers at least, it looks like. So sorry about that. Go ahead then and jump back up to where we were talking about the simplified method. So back to page 5, jumping around as I mentioned. So that's the simplified method again. This would allow someone to have up to 10% of their property as impervious area. No need for easements or recording of documents. This is going to be backed by calculations, and anyone's going to have the ability to submit for a permit determination, as I mentioned, and get that opportunity to get an analysis of their site. And then, so if we're giving the EO, of course, an opportunity here, if there's additional offsite analysis or things that would need to be incorporated on a case-by-case basis, flood risk areas, et cetera, that might impact that, or downstream infrastructure that might be constricting, whatever the case might be. So we're building that in. So.
I just had a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you look at the simplified method with these curve numbers and corresponding C values, I just looked at it like a 2-acre site, you know, just threw in an intensity and just changed from existing to proposed for grass, you know, using the curve number table, and it was greater than 1 CFS. So, I mean, without even putting a building on it. So what does that mean? So they need to, there's no way that
Sorry.
just go, using that table, going from existing to proposed and changing the curve number, you're never gonna be in compliance.
Well, that's a good point. I didn't realize that was happening. So I think that, again, drilling into those curve numbers is what we would be looking at, but,
Compaction.
Doesn't that mean though, you just need detention?
well, that's what it would be, but,
But it's just a grass field going to a grass field.
right, so, but
Okay.
this is being triggered if you have the half acre of impervious as well. So if you're just going grass to grass, you're not triggering the need for this calculation.
Right, but if you did just grass to grass, you're gonna need detention, so you're definitely gonna need detention even if you put 10 square feet of pavement on there.
So you'd never make the 10% of your property criteria.
Right, I mean, I just threw some numbers on that. I don't know, it doesn't appear so.
Well, I haven't experimented with those curve numbers, as I mentioned. They're just kind of on there for discussion purposes. But I guess if you were to run with the scenario that, let's say you're adding half an acre to your property, and then you have additional grading areas that you're going to include as part of the calculation, then if you don't meet the simplified method, then potentially you do have to provide detention, or you get the engineer to analyze the infrastructure. And that's the risk with the generic 1 CFS 2.25. It's, you know, and maybe that's where the percentage, to Mike's point, is better. And I can come back and I can incorporate that into the calculations, what the curve numbers showing, you know, if you were to just go from existing to proposed, here's what would happen, and that would be a compaction component. And I mean, we do so, like, that's something that we saw on a solar farm where they were proposing a lot of grading, and that was our concern, is you're gonna have a lot of compaction and increase that runoff. And now you're over your 8150. So it kind of ties into that, but, yeah, I don't wanna get into you know, in that particular case, if you're not adding more than a half acre of impervious, then you're not required to provide this information. But if the results show you're gonna be increasing the runoff in general, then I feel like that's just an overall different conversation to have with the group on stormwater management and the impacts of compaction on sites.
I mean, I guess I'm just saying, I think it's impossible to meet the simplified method criteria, it seems. By throwing some numbers in there, I don't know, or maybe we come up with some scenarios that could meet it, but,
Well, I did
it would
have
have to
those.
be a pretty small site, I guess. And I don't know if even a small site, if you're adding a half acre to it,
Well,
I just think you're gonna end up needing detention no matter what, so maybe adding that additional step for people is not gonna be helpful. I don't know. I mean, I understand you're trying to be helpful, but just using the numbers that we have and saying existing to proposed there's a curve number change without, you know, knowing anything is gonna result in the flows being higher.
Well, that was, I mean, it's interesting, it popped up here. I mean, this was a site that I did a 77 acre critical duration analysis on. And it showed an increase of more, and this was just, and you can see here, I did 7 acres of impervious. And if you just look at the proposed flows, I modeled, this was a large swale that I modeled. If I didn't model the swale, then you're going to get a large increase in there. But this was, this was a 2-acre one that I did showing existing versus proposed. And again, using different curve numbers. I don't remember what I used here. But I definitely used 98 for the impervious area.
I wonder if the difference is that this analysis, Steve, the one you were talking about, maybe assumed like the whole site was disturbed, whereas Stoyan's here maybe only assumed that it's just like a chunk of impervious and the rest of the site would remain undisturbed.
Yeah, or as part of that, you could, whatever your box is for your project, how much impervious do you have in there? How much vegetation do you have in there? What do you have in there? And it all becomes part of it. But yeah, in these examples, I pretty much drew my box and I said, I'm just gonna throw all impervious and I'm tying into that existing. That doesn't mean that you might not be doing, maybe half of this is impervious, the rest is just grading to make it reasonable if you're on a slope or whatever it is. But yeah, these are some of the calculations. You can see the curve number changes that increase, but this is in relation to adding impervious area to do the calculation. If if you're regrading the whole site and you're dealing with compaction, yeah, I think realistically you're going to increase the flow rate off of that. That's not going to be a trigger for detention though, because you don't meet that impervious threshold.
Question, so the example that you showed would potentially be like an agricultural development, like, they're building something on the middle of a large parcel, but does that?
There's like a smaller, that's
Yeah.
a 2-acre one, or maybe.
Do you see that a lot, like for like non-agricultural developments, that they just go in and develop a piece of a large parcel? Or is it always like, okay, this is my land and I'm gonna convert it to a shopping mall or, something, or housing development, and I'm only gonna use half of my parcel?
Yeah, I'd say we see it from time to time on the commercial side where they do only want to use a portion, and that gets into part of it of potentially needing a conditional use permit, so they only want to partition that off anyway. So sometimes that could be a driver, but yeah, we do see it from time to time. But yeah, mostly it would, the larger properties are more ag related, but they're starting to turn into like wedding venues and agro-tourism type stuff. And they do only want to develop a portion because they want to use the rest for like corn maze or whatever, pumpkin patch or whatever it is. Yeah, but that would be the majority. We don't have a lot of large commercial industrial. I don't know the last time the county had a subdivision. They're kind of driven towards getting incorporated into municipalities at this point through the zoning ordinance. So you're not going to see a lot of it, but that's typically where it comes in, is this type of situation. They want to expand, do something, or maybe it's parking related. They want to add additional parking is what we normally see. We've had a lot of requests for like truck stops and those type of things come through. But I can, to your point, Steve, I can take a look at that, but I feel like that drives on the larger overarching point of, is compaction a concern for stormwater management? And I feel like it is, but to the calculation you did, unless you're triggering impervious, the half-acre impervious threshold, you wouldn't be doing these calculations. But then if you add half an acre and you're doing more grading and you're doing more compaction, then to your point, yeah, maybe we do need to have detention there because of the compaction and the additional gravel area is producing more runoff maybe there's a downstream concern for that additional runoff. Capacity issues, culverts, storm sewers, and I'm just thinking municipalities in general as well. They have a lot more infrastructure than we do, and probably their capacity issues are gonna be compounded to a higher degree.
I'm just wondering if there's any scenario in which you would add a half acre of impervious and not have an increase in these runoffs that are,
Yes.
would be less than
The
this.
scenario would be that you're doing it in a larger tributary area with a longer time of concentration. You're doing it far enough away. That's basically the scenario. If you've got a half an acre right up next to the property line, you're not gonna hit that. And I think that's something that you brought up previously, because when we were looking at these calculations, I was focusing on the 24-hour. And I think you and Jody were like, no, we need to do critical duration. We changed that changed the metric. Previously, if you just look at the 24-hour duration, you could come up with a scenario that you can do a half acre of impervious right next to someone's property line.
Right.
And get away without detention required, and that could be a problem. And so we changed it to this critical duration method, which eliminated that situation. You're not gonna be able to do that in these circumstances. The only way you can do that is if you have a long enough time of concentration, which goes back to the idea of large farm ag. I'm doing it in the middle of my property. Is this really creating a downstream issue by the time it hits my property line? Or you're not only doing that, but you're also converting some of that existing land to a more native vegetation to help bring that curve number down, to help reduce, again, you're dropping that flow rate to be more consistent with existing conditions. Those are the scenarios that we've seen. And I know Darren has volunteered, him and his staff, to help analyze a lot more of these situations, and it sounds like that's still on the table.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna be coordinating with him, and so if you guys have these type of scenarios that you guys want us to run, and I'm gonna try to give him some, real life situations with being mindful not to release too much pertinent information. We're gonna figure out how to get around that. So hopefully we're gonna have some more analysis on what it's gonna look like, but these are great ideas. Obviously, when, we put this together, we ran through it. I'm sure there's a handful of other scenarios that we haven't thought of to bring up. Just your perspective on running just the calculation of existing versus proposed and showing that runoff increase is a valid point. And, whether or not we want to deal with that and the compaction related to them. And certainly that would make sense.
And maybe there's just more clarification that's needed, because right now with the simplified method says A is the tributary area in acres. Doesn't say anything about hydrologically disturbed or anything else. So you just take an existing site and you take it, after you did something to it, it's a proposed site.
That is the difference here. You are taking tributary area as opposed to your project area. Because the idea of you working within a 100-acre trib area at the upstream end is a lot different than the 2-acre tributary area at the downstream end. Your time of concentration
So then
factors
the
into that.
proposed, using a proposed curve number may not be realistic then. Maybe I'm just misreading this, but maybe you use the existing curve number for the tributary area. I guess there's just some clarification that can go into the simplified method.
Absolutely, as I mentioned, we drew up the definition, but the proposed is meant to capture, is meant to capture the compaction aspect of it that we don't currently see. Currently with any stormwater design, when you're running the numbers, your detention is based on existing curve numbers. In reality, that when they do the site, you're not working at a curve. I mean, the TR 55 even says a curve number of 68, right? By the time they come in and do the roads and all the compaction, to Jody's point, you're not at a 68, but yet your detention volume is designed off the existing. So it's trying to capture that component, and that's why there's the increase. Yeah, Lily, go ahead.
I think if you were to maybe change this to just a compaction percentage, because it just comparing the existing and the proposed, the grass area is compacted then 8%, whereas the rest of the table where the numbers have changed are 2 and 3%. So it might be leaning away from the grass. Like it might be.
No, that's a great idea. As I mentioned, the numbers were just thrown out there, but I think if we want to say that compaction is 10%, then we can take whatever existing numbers we like and add 10% for the proposed to capture compaction more cleanly throughout the process. And if there's a different curve number type like wetland or something that you're not really going to get compaction, we can modify that as needed. But I think that would be a great uniform approach for some of these ground cover types. If that helps. Is that kind of what you were going at a little bit?
It is, and I looked also at the TR55 table and I mean, like you said, it's a lot of different options, and maybe these are kind of like the ones that apply most to McHenry County. So it's appreciated that it's, boiled down like this. But if I were, doing an engineering project, I might not bump up grass areas 8%. I don't know, or I might keep native vegetation in areas where it's not, highly compacted. The same, like existing would be the same as proposed. I don't know. But it just seems like it's, 8% is a lot higher than the others at 2 and 3%.
Not intentional. Absolutely not intentional. It's just trying to, I'll be honest, the way that the curve name, the way that the table is put together is I think we took C values and then used D values. So I think if you were to look at that grass area in tier 55, I think 74 is the C and 80 is the D. So I'm not even trying to reach a certain percentage, which again, we can factor into it. I'm really trying to use as much of the tier 55 as possible to give a much more simplified component, and then also move away from the idea that detention volumes are based on existing curve numbers. And factor in the idea that you're gonna get some compaction. Now, maybe it's using the curve numbers and then not using D numbers, but factoring in compaction. So if you are at an existing curve number, C value of 74, in the proposed, using the D doesn't make sense because maybe that doesn't factor compaction accurately. And I do agree with that that might be too steep there. And so going back and drilling down on the numbers, those are placeholders by all means, but it was just a place to start, an idea of, and that's why we did it, because now we're having the right kinds of conversations to drill down further into it. And I think that's a great point of saying existing is C soil and proposed is D soil doesn't appear to be accurate, and we would need to adjust these numbers. And maybe what ends up happening is we have 2 rows of curve numbers, maybe for AB soils, CD soils, and then those are your existing conditions, and then in the proposed conditions, you use a compaction factor of 10% to bump those numbers up. And that is a simple way to factor in compaction as part of it. So I don't, do you guys like that idea? Brian, you kind of nodded your head on it.
But the problem I have with it is, and I'm sure other people are thinking about this, is how do you get across what compaction is, right? I mean, I may have run a dozer over something 50 times, other I'm gonna run a dozer over 2 times, and certain soils are gonna be more sensitive to that running back and forth, so it gets a little bit tricky on how I mean, however you do it, but I mean, I'm just thinking about how you're gonna get to that point.
Here's, I guess I would make the parallel to like a clogging factor for inlets, right? It's just a compaction factor that we want to run with. I understand it's gonna vary across the job site, and so maybe it's a range. We can get more information on what are the typical compaction ranges that you would see in a job site. Maybe we choose the median for it. And, you know, I think of it more of like a clogging factor for inlets, whether you do 50%, 75%, there's gonna be some clogging, right? And some sites are gonna do better than others, and depending on where they're located and how much parking and next to the islands or next to the entrance, and is it a Walmart that sees a lot of foot traffic, or is it a smaller store that sees 5 cars a day, right? Those are gonna be way different, and so, but you still have them. So I feel like this would be kind of a similar component, it's just choosing a compaction factor that we like and moving forward. So I think that's what I kind of hear, is to still have the hydrologic soil groups and then incorporate a compaction factor when you're looking at the proposed. Everyone got quiet,
So in other words, you're bumping the number, not necessarily the class, right?
Right, right. So I'm not moving from a C group to a D group, which is mostly based on the soil types. You're not really changing the soil types, you're just compacting it, so a compaction factor makes more sense as the bump up from existing to proposed, as opposed to using the soil group. I do think that would be appropriate, or at least it makes sense.
Just ask Mike for reference, when the WDO in Lake County accounted for this, did they go from one soil classification to the next to account for compaction due to development?
I was actually I was gonna look that up. I opened up the WDO to see the runoff calculations. But I think the discussion in that situation revolved more around like subdivisions, you know? And so that's why I was asking about the types of development. But I think that any time that you're putting in structures or roads, you know, you're trying to get to a structural level compaction ratio.
Yeah.
You know, I think in all cases you are. So you're getting to, what is that, 95 standard Proctor or something like that, so that you can build on it without differential settling. So I think we just said you had to, all the areas that were gonna be developed structurally had to go to a D soil. I thought it said that.
I don't remember it being written like that.
I know, and then the one allowance that we had was if you were gonna plant natives, native areas could be reduced in their runoff capability.
That I do remember.
One other thing we have talked about, this was really apparent with the solar farms. You know, you've got this large site that they're working on, and they're saying, well, we're gonna excavate here and here. The contractors aren't gonna just jump from the edge of the project to that point. They're gonna be driving all over the place. They're not distinguishing, you know, where they're gonna be doing the work. So the compaction is gonna be taking place all across the construction site, you know, whether or not they are putting a roadway in right here or not. And so you do have to really look at the compaction as a site on a commercial property in particular. You know, even if you do natives, you know, it's going to take a while for that root structure to take place. So, you know, how do you weigh that as the final? But the compaction is not going to be limited just to a narrow footprint where they're putting the road in.
So like the disturbed area?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so 501.06, areas of development that are hydrologically disturbed and compacted shall be changed to the next higher hydrologic soil group classification.
That's Lake County?
Yeah, so like B to C or C to D.
And that I took that, and that's why, because like I said, I took some of that information, just simplified for discussion. I'm not, and again, these numbers don't necessarily reflect what we want to do or how we want to do it. And that's certainly, and that's why it's a simple approach, you just do it. But we can take it one step further and do a compaction factor, as long as we feel comfortable and confident with it. And again, this would be the more conservative approach, right? So
That language though, Mike, implies that if you're grading, you're digging for the whole thing. And that was pretty strong in some cases, which was the way it was enforced.
Which is the idea that Steve brought up, that if you're just doing that, then your runoff numbers are so high that you're gonna have a hard time maybe getting around the need for detention, and maybe it's not warranted if you just kind of look at it, big picture type thing, so yes, more conservative approach, maybe not the best fit for this, and maybe looking at a compaction factor makes more sense.
Or if you can demonstrate that the compaction is not going to be site-wide, you can go to the more elaborate TR50 approach.
Yeah, I mean, we throw that out there of demonstrate how you're minimizing compaction in some of these areas. We've certainly had some where they showed us, here's how our traffic of our vehicles are gonna move through this area to limit compaction in the solar array field. So it's still, yes, and if the engineer comes in and says, I'm gonna lay down matting and do this and take these extra steps, by all means, we wanna reward them with that effort. It's not to say like, well, you're locked into this idea, it's just here's the requirement if you'd like to avoid having to bump up your curve numbers due to compaction and things like that, then demonstrate how you're dealing with that.
I guess one question I have for you guys is, one of the things we want to do with these revisions is incentivize good land development and disincentivize more disturbance to the land than is necessary. So would this approach as we have it now incentivize reducing compaction, or would it incentivize increasing compaction and disturbance of a site, or is it neither? Because I think we want to make sure that we are not having unintended consequences and saying, well, if I do this, I might as well whack the whole thing. Do we need to tweak the language so that it does incentivize, better land development practices? Or does this disincentivize bad practices the way it's written?
I think it's going to depend on the existing soils of the site. If I have a lot of A soils I want to preserve, I'm going to probably minimize the tracking I can, right? But if I have a site that's primarily CD, why should I care, right? And I'm not trying to be laissez-faire about it. I'm just stating that, I would want to minimize that and protect those components. Now, ideally, your high runoff area or your low runoff areas, your A's and B's, are also areas that if this ordinance goes the direction I'm thinking it goes, there's also going to be infiltration zones you want to protect as well. So they should be one and the same.
That's the idea behind capturing compaction, moving to proposed curve number, because then you're incorporating that, and so you're gonna end up dealing with, or at least then it is an idea of, well, reduce your curve numbers, be a better manager of your land to try to lower your detention volume or the need for detention, incorporate one of them infrastructure. And that's the idea behind the jump, just like Lake County, or at least part of it is that incentive. How about I keep moving, just because you guys are great at digging down, and if I don't move you along, we'll keep on discussing, which I love, but I'm also mindful of everyone's time here. So we'll come back, we'll take a look at some information. You guys have seen now the curve number table jump, kind of the Lake County method. We'll try to come up with a compaction factor, incorporate some of that AB ideology, rewrite that in, and bring it back. And maybe what we'll try to do is provide a little bit better justification for some of the curve numbers, if we can. I mean, we're not the experts at it. And I always look at Brad and he's just shaking his head on the curve number thing. So if he's shaking his head, I'm gonna be even more lost. So, but we'll do our best. Yes, that's okay. You got excited.
Yes, I did. With regard to breaking the new simplified method with summer interns on staff right now, like if you were to send out, I'm sure that, I know my company would probably.
I have a second offer for interns, okay?
And
Yeah,
others probably.
You know, Darren reached out to me previously, and I do want to do that. I just, so as part of the discussion in the group, one, I wanted to make sure everybody wanted to see that. And,
What are they doing?
well, I think that's where we, what do we want them to do, I guess, if they're offering.
I think the intent was to run like some sensitivity analysis, Mike.
Oh, okay.
Like when we're looking at these different examples, would be to continue to look at a lot of different examples so that everyone gets comfortable that this would result in the development patterns and, you know, detention volumes and things like that. And also to gauge how much work it takes as well to do it.
Yeah, and I think just comparing, here's the old, here's the new, we're not creating, to Scott's point, unintended consequences, and then to Steve's point, did we find some kind of situation we need to address that, you know, people are able to kind of work around that isn't clear unless we start getting into that. So absolutely.
I was just saying, like, if you wanted to, like, you know, send it to your group, because I'm sure there's some stragglers that are at other companies as well that.
Okay. Well, I will, so what I will do to help ease that burden, or at least my thought process, and this was going to be part of the discussion, is I think I'll pull permitting information that we have on file, and maybe just try to clip tributary areas and things like that for you guys, so at least you had all the information. And then from an analysis perspective, we would have the old way, because it would have been part of that permitting process, but then you can start to apply this new methodology and see how it changes, or does it work how we intended to, or are you guys running into issues or things like that was gonna be my thought process. But I wanted to open it up to Darren, because it seems like maybe he's had his staff look at a couple of situations. I wasn't sure if you've learned anything new, or if that approach makes sense to feed you guys that information, or would you want more out of that, or kind of, you know, that's where I wanted to have a discussion of, I like the idea, I just want to understand how much I need to give you, because I can pull from examples, but I want to be mindful of other people's work as I'm sharing this information and making sure we don't cross any boundaries there. But at the same time, I don't want you guys having to start from scratch and working off data to just expedite that. So you're running more examples as compared to doing almost the design work on top of it. So, and maybe I can put something together for a couple of sites and send it out, and you guys can kind of maybe give me feedback on more information, less information, or this works for now, give us more. You know, maybe that might be the best approach.
We were just gonna use some reviews that we were doing for communities. And, you know, obviously all the ones that are coming in now are coming in using the current method, and we were just gonna redo them using the new method here.
Okay.
Not so much what we just talked about as to verifying whether or not detention was required, but
Right.
more once it was determined that stormwater detention was required, then we were gonna go into like the next phase. But we were also gonna then like run some sensitivity analysis of things like existing curve numbers and existing time of concentrations, and, you know, how does that play into the amount of stormwater detention that's needed?
Yeah, that would be awesome. I mean, we you know, I tried to do some of that when I was presenting you guys the information and run some scenarios and whatnot, but obviously it's gonna be a different flavor coming from you guys currently practicing it. I mean, I hadn't touched hydrographs in a while. I got into it, so I had to brush that off.
One thing that I found when doing it, and we just looked at a couple, actually we just picked a fictitious site, but it helps to limit like the number of sites that we're looking at, because that's where the crux of the work comes in is, or if, I guess, if you had sites where the existing conditions had already been analyzed, that was where the bulk of the work came in, was analyzing the existing conditions, getting the drainage divides, the tributary areas, flow rates. But once you get that set, then it's pretty easy to look at different development scenarios, because you're just changing curve numbers. And then what is it, it was a while before, since I've looked at it, but, looking at the amount of impervious area, because you gotta multiply that by 0.85, right? And so you're
Right,
constantly
yeah,
subtracting
there's a-
things off of that existing
Yes.
release rate. But once you kind of get it set up, then it's easy to look at multiple scenarios.
Okay, that's what I was kind of figuring, is if I can get you guys the trib area with the TCs and the curve numbers and all of that already, it's probably gonna make it pretty simple for you guys, because you run one model and then it's just tweaking it from there. So that was my thought process, was getting you that beginning information and even the proposed information. And then, as you mentioned, once you get one model set up or a spreadsheet or, whatever it is, you should be off and running. So I'll go through, that was kind of my thought process, and that's why I waited, I want to have that conversation to kind of confirm that's what you'd be looking for. So I think after you kind of confirming that, I'll put some stuff together, send it out. I guess I'll send it to the group, so if anybody is interested, you can. I may send out a disclaimer just so we're not running into any Roberts rules and stuff like that, but I'll put something together and get out information, and yes, I would absolutely appreciate that.
And just for people's knowledge, we did look at two sites. We looked at one, which was more of a open space. I think it was like 100 acres. We've just found an open parcel it was 122 acres. We found like an open parcel in the middle of the county somewhere. And the other one was a redevelopment, which was a little bit more complicated. The open space one, the new methodology resulted in less detention than the current methodology, primarily because when we looked at a couple different curve numbers, we were always going to a negative release rate, which then defaulted us to the 2-year release rate. So that we're finding that less detention was required for that open space. But then when we looked at a redevelopment or like a redevelopment of a partial part of an existing site, it required more detention. So just some early things that we found.
Love to get more on that and obviously fine tune that, so, thank you. Okay, so, with that, I'll get some stuff out to everybody, and I'll share all this information. Obviously, just email me, if you guys have ideas, scenarios, always welcome them. With that, I guess it's a great segue. Actually, not a great segue just yet to discuss detention, because we did add, under impervious areas, we did add a component for solar farms here. So this is a big one that we're adding to basically have a definition in here on is the area underneath the impervious, is the area underneath the panels impervious or pervious? So this is something that comes from just doing real-time solar reviews and conversations that we've had internally, looking at how they've been performing. So this is basically the result of some real information. So the areas under the solar farm arrays, which they're not called solar farms, they're electric production systems or something, I don't know. Very specific, the state's attorney has told us. I just, for the discussion, I warned everybody, I'm gonna use solar farms just to get through it. We'll change the verbiage later, but. So the areas under the solar farm arrays shall be considered pervious if the following conditions are met. Number one, there is no proposed grading within the array. So we talked about compaction and what that does. Number two, the county's native vegetation performance standards for solar farms are being followed. And then number three, native vegetation is proposed with a vegetative maintenance plan in accordance with the county's native vegetation performance standards for solar farms. So that kind of repeats there, but it's the idea that you're also proposing natives on top of meeting our performance
separate standards for those?
For solar farms? Yeah.
Yeah. We have a memo if anybody wants that memo.
I want
Okay.
I'm surprised I haven't shared that with you already. We've had it for many years.
Why? Coming home with something today.
Well, if he wants it that badly, maybe we'll make him work for it. So you got any interns available? Yeah.
A question out of curiosity. We get involved with the solar farms regarding the right-of-way dedication regarding the entrances. And of course, we also have to have them put together the rumbles so that we don't get too much mud onto the county highways, when they're county highways. But in watching the operations, I understand if you're not doing massive regrading, fine. But have you seen the compaction they do just to put the array up? I mean, the rig they take through to drill in and core the posts, the rig they take through to set the steel framing, the rig they take through to set the panels. I mean, you don't have to grade it all, you've got compaction.
Do they actually build solar farms without grading anything?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
For us, yes, we haven't approved
Okay.
one.
Out on Route 14, they have one going in right now, it's huge. And you can take a look at it, it's a rolling hill, and I agree, they're not regrading.
Okay.
I mean, that they're not doing, but they're compacting the heck out of
And
that.
we've wrestled with that.
Okay.
So in every consultation, when we're doing our reviews, every review letter, we emphasize, the primary reason for vegetation not to establish and failure to meet your cover requirements is soil compaction. And recommend using track vehicles and other low pressure approaches. Now, I do think that at least the ones that I've seen are track vehicles that are pounding the posts in. But I don't know how else you're gonna do it without, having cranes set up.
Exactly, I just,
And,
it's, okay, that's fine, it's been considered, that's all.
Yeah, no, I don't know how we can strengthen that, but that's, in every single letter review we put out, we make that statement.
Well, your hands are also somewhat tied because of the state mandate that, hey, you
Absolutely.
can't impose anything on solar farms, we need them. So I'm sure you can only take it so far.
And conversely, I mean, if it's still an agricultural production, you're gonna have the tractors and all the other equipment going out there. Now, they certainly, are leaders when it comes to, reducing pressure. So, you always see the track vehicles. So most of the farm equipment now is using much less, low pressure, low impact equipment.
Mm-hmm.
But in either case, that type of compaction is occurring.
But you're following the native vegetation standards and a maintenance plan.
Yep.
So the theory is that native veg will break up the soil.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So it'll
Yeah.
reverse that compaction over time.
Over time.
But we do
absolutely.
want to limit the use of heavy grading vehicles and those type of things, because that was on one site where, they were virtually proposing the grading to hit deflection angles, and we fought them tooth and nail. It's like, oh, we'll limit to these areas, and to Scott's point, no contractor's gonna drive there, and then they had a huge stockpile at the north end, so you're using dump trucks on top of that, and no contractor is, going to follow these nice lines. They're going point A to point B, that's my shortest path.
One other question, because it occurred up in the Richmond area.
Yeah.
They had one go in on North Solon, and it happened, they busted field tiles. And you're probably aware or not aware. Do you require a field tile study?
Yeah.
Okay, there's one
It's
required,
part of their
okay.
AMOS too,
Okay,
their
'cause I'm just-
impact mitigation agreements with the
Okay.
state.
I think
All that tile stuff is in there too.
part of the CUP process, they're looking to require that upfront now.
So not after the
Looking-
fact?
Right.
They're looking to make sure that we can legally require it at that step in the process, as opposed to later when we're reviewing it for permitting.
For whatever it's worth, just so you're aware, yesterday I took a call from a surveyor, they'd asked about road right-of-ways on 4 different areas, one being county highway. So I assisted in the research and I got them what they needed, and he called back and he's saying, well, wait a minute, how can any group in the state of Illinois impose anything on solar farms? I said, well, McHenry County does it, so if you're gonna be building up here, or your team is going to, be aware. And so I don't know that that message is clear to the solar people. Just
Yeah, and it does, Zach, I saw your hand raised. It does have to do with the state mandate on the conditional use permitting side. That's where you're limited. Once you get through, you can't say no to them based on, I'm a solar farm. That's where a lot of the rub is, but once you get to stormwater, you gotta meet building codes, you gotta meet stormwater ordinances, you gotta meet X, Y, and Z. So at that point, yeah, I want a drain tile survey and.
Well,
this
I
and
mentioned to
that,
them,
so.
because they were calling regarding DOT.
Yeah.
And I said, well, you have touched base, or your team has touched base with planning and development? They said, why? And I said, there's stormwater. I said, there's a lot of other, oh, no, we haven't done that. And I said, well, I'd do it before you do your layout,
Yeah.
because otherwise you're gonna be redoing your darn layout.
If they don't know us now, they will know us.
Well, okay,
Well, that's been part of the issue with the ZBA, is wanting to have that information, and they feel that it should be important consideration, especially if the site is heavily floodplain. Well, okay, we're just gonna plan on elevate. Well, we don't know if that's gonna work or not. And so they feel stressed out that if they say yes to this, even though anybody looking at it like, hey, this is not a good place to put solar production. Right, and it might not meet some of the permitting requirements once they get to it, but they feel handcuffed that they're so limited in the amount of information that they can ask that they have to say yes based on that. And so the county's looking to incorporate a lot more of that, or as much as possible up front for the ZBA to have more of an ability to, so, yes.
Just a question on the vegetation performance standards, because I haven't seen them. I tried finding them, I couldn't find them, so it would be useful.
I'll print up copies before you guys do.
Awesome.
We'll have Lily send it out to the group as well.
Perfect. Is there verification built into those? Because it talks about the plan to be in accordance with them, but are they doing any kind of verification that what they've done or what they've planted actually is meeting these standards?
Yeah, so right now, the performance standards, because, the first 5 that went in kind of is what prompted the development of the performance standards. To be quite honest, without performance standards, you're gonna end up with fields of weeds. And so you really do need to have those performance standards in place. We have 5-year of performance standards. So first year you need certain percentage of cover. The cover crop can account for that by year 2. You need to have certain percentage of certain percentage can't be these species. By year 3, it should be predominantly what you intended to plant. Year 4, year 5, continued performance. It's not at the same standard as what we would require for a restoration or a mitigation, but it's following the same standard practices that you would find in the consulting field for restoration practices. Just kind of, this is not a restoration.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we review all of that. So they have to put together a management plan and submit that as part of our review process. We look very closely at the species list, even to the point where, if they're proposing a big blue stem, which grows to be 6 feet or taller, and they're only 3 feet off the ground, that's not going to fly, because there's no way they can implement the management plan and produce energy. So, I mean, we get down to that level of granularity in our review. As part of our update, we are going to require that they provide tags from the seeds, because that, right now we have no idea what they're actually putting down. Is it actually the species that they spec? Is it, meeting the percent live seed that you would find as industry standards? So we are going to actually require that they provide seed tags to verify what was actually put in the ground. These are all standard industry practices. So it's really not a big ask. And that, I guess theoretically would also drive them to hire people that know what they're doing, which will then increase the likelihood of success. But that's kind of the process now. I will provide you with the 5 years monitoring and management that we had. And the reason we have this reference twice is the first time we mention it is kind of codifying what they're going to be reviewing. And then the next point 3 is that they have to be providing the maintenance plan and these things in compliance with number 2. So there is a kind of a reason why that repetition is there.
And then given that this is, from the solar farms aspect of it, basically a way for them to get around detention or attenuation, what's the stick if they don't meet the performance standards? Would they have to go back in and perform detention? Or is this just hopefully they follow it?
Like a letter of credit or something like that?
We have looked into that and moved away from that as an option, but we would be able to.
I think, and we'll get support on this with the beautiful solar farms, but essentially if they don't meet that, then they would not be meeting, they'd be in violation. And we can assess a fine for every day that the violation is open. And not that we would potentially do that, but that would be the stick essentially. Now, some of these guys have deep pockets, but I doubt anyone's willing to just keep paying fines, I would think. So we haven't run into that. Should we run into that, we might learn if that works or learn more from it and maybe need to adjust it.
Would the fine be assessed to the solar company or to the landowner? Because in theory,
Developer. Yeah.
also it's not to the, because in most cases, it's tagged to the property.
Yeah,
That's a great question, but-
we can, even in all violations, we can go after the perpetrator. Yes, it does not have to be the property owner. In a lot of cases, it's the property just because if it changes hands multiple times, but we do have an ability in general, and we have used that on occasion to go after the person or the party that was responsible for that. So, yeah, I mean, we could, at that point, if it's a constant thing and it goes to court, I mean, the judge can enter in any kind of injunction that he sees fit, that, hey, there is no movement, and we've had this recently, if the judge feels that they're just gonna keep doing the same thing, then he's going to impose some type of injunction on that so it doesn't keep happening. I guess it depends on the judge these days, but has that ever been any different? So, but that would be the idea, at least. We haven't had to put it in action. Part of the problem currently is this isn't codified. So the way we've been asking for the performance standards, it's been triggered on projects where they have been exceeding the 20,000 square feet of impervious, because then we've been saying, okay, you're now triggering detention. If you want to go up to 1 acre, you have to show that there's going to be no flood damage, minimal risks. The way that you do that is you're incorporating your natives to drop down your curve number, which goes full circle to our discussion we've been having related to detention. So now that becomes part of your stormwater management system. And if you're not maintaining it, then, it's basically goes into a violation perspective. But on those sites that have short accesses and things like that, where it's not triggering, we're not able to add our performance standards onto every project. It's only those that are triggering the impervious area that we can then say your natives are acting as part of your stormwater management system.
So essentially by incorporating it into the SMO, you're giving teeth to this in a way that ensures that solar farms are maintaining the soil quality and everything else.
And now we're able to require performance standards across the board, not just for, because they're all gonna have impervious areas. That's a good point. The way this is written under the section that you have to trigger a half an acre, so we may need to look at that closer and add some additional language related to that. I don't know.
I was smiling when you were talking about seed tags, because it sounded like Pizzo's presentation from the workshop.
Okay. Well, like I said, that's an industry standard. Because, I go back to, I started my career doing construction monitoring and having to get the tags from the concrete mix that's being used and things like that. So, but seed tags for vegetation, when we would spec a package, that would always be in there, that the tags have to be provided.
All right, so that's solar farms. So that's the the background behind why we want to have that and codify it to give us that teeth, require the performance standards. So moving into allowable release rates, again, this is something that we've looked at previously. Given the time, this is something that I'll work with Darren and Lillian and anybody else that wants to do some analysis and apply this and see, do we need to adjust these rates? You know, it's 0.85 in the 100-year. Again, that was way back when I presented, you know, where that comes from or the idea behind it. So does that need to be adjusted? What does that look like? And then also, if you're hitting those negative or zero values, this hierarchy, is the existing 2-year good enough? Again, thinking about that incentive component, is it too much? So hopefully we'll get some of that data rolling in, be able to kind of circle back and drill in on those numbers a little bit more. So the rest of this is new stuff. So it's just touching this up. What we tried to do is we tried to go through anywhere that it was discussing. So like in your packet, I'm on page 7, following along just above C, it would be new. It got renumbered. I'm not sure if it should be renumbered, but it's 3 here. You can see we're trying to eliminate any mention to a detention facility type idea that goes back to the attenuation system and being able to use green infrastructure. Here for infiltration facilities specifically, this is again something that is discussed in another part of the ordinance, but basically maximum allowable rate for an infiltration facility is 2 inches per hour. So just calling that out if someone wanted to put that as an exfiltration into their modeling. And that it needs to be determined by a professional following the Crystal Lake Watershed Stormwater Management Design Manual. So
Here we are with the stupid question, why 2 inches?
that's what the design manual had.
Crystal Lake has?
Yeah.
Looking at you.
I don't know. It was Hay that did it. No, I think it was Hay that did it.
Associates is the one that.
Darren's catching.
Crystal Lake one?
Darren's catching flack for no reason.
I'm sorry, I know you guys were in there for a long time.
That was handed to us.
I think that was Gary Schaefer from Hay and Associates that wrote that.
Yeah, so they had 1/2 inch minimum for infiltration, 2 inch maximum. And what we're seeing in a lot of designs is like the people that bring in the limestone for like horse pastures and things like that. They want to try to use the soil scientist, and we've been allowing it as long as that range comes back, that the low end is at least 1/2 inch or higher. So we say, okay, we've got the infiltration, we'll treat it as a pervious surface. This takes it one step further to say, if you want to incorporate it as part of any detention design for high water level type analysis, you need to go out, run an infiltration test, figure out what exactly it is if you want to incorporate that into your model.
I mean, if you want to go higher than 2 inches per hour.
No, if you
2
want
inches
to.
a cap regardless.
Correct. Because sometimes what we see is a range of 0.75 and 3. So that's fine for us to say you've got the infiltration, whatever you lay on top, as long as it can infiltrate through, we'll consider that the infiltration's still valid. But if you want to use it for detention, how do I allow you to use the 0.75 versus the 2 max? I need you to drill down and get the actual infiltration number if you want to incorporate it into a model as part of sizing calculations.
I've just seen it.
I just want to make sure that makes sense. I don't know.
I'm not sure it does, but I mean,
Okay.
I've
So-
seen it much higher numbers than that, and I guess I'm trying to understand the true
So,
science to it.
so if you're building a detention basin and you say, I want to put it in this spot, and then you get soil classification that says, I've got infiltration between 1/2 inch and 5 inches. We say, okay, infiltration will work from the perspective of you have the soils, but now in your detention design, you're going to design a volume with an outlet, but you're also going to incorporate the infiltration rate. So we're capping you at 2, but I also need to know what that is if you're using it for sizing. You can't just automatically, because it's given in a range between 1/2 and 5, I don't know if that location you're going to get 1.25. or 1.5, or 1.6, or whatever it is, that's gonna matter because you're designing a high water level, right? That might have
Oh, you're
implications.
you're combining detention and bioinfiltration in the same place.
Right, that's what this is saying. If you're using an infiltration facility for detention and you wanna use a specific infiltration rate, I need to know what that is, and I'm capping you at 2. And that's Darren's fault.
No, I apologize, I thought the 2 things. were
Anything else you wanna lump on, that's fine, just.
No, and then Crystal Lake Watershed Management Design Manual also gives the methodology on how to run that, how many boring samples you want in your infiltration area, all that stuff. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. I think it's a good document, but if you guys want to, dig into that, we could.
Well, the problem with the infiltration basins is that eventually the residue piles there and it caps the bottom of the infiltration basin. That's why you try to separate the 2 systems.
So later on, we do, and that's why I tried to connect the 2 sections here, and I'll skip ahead to the post-construction BMPs that we ran. Part of, one of the criteria for infiltration is having a sedimentation basin as part of that, to eliminate that concern. So I know I'm jumping around, I'm scrolling on you guys, but I just don't have a good way of going through, and then it's all so connected, so.
So an infiltration basin has to have a sediment trap ahead of it.
Yes.
Like, ideally a 4-bay type of system, and at least the way I would always approach it is I want to have the 4-bay where it's easily accessible. I've seen where they have the 4-bay on the far end, so you have to drive over all the native vegetation that you've established over 20 years to clean out the 4-bay. But 4-bay would at least reduce the sediment load and extend the life of the infiltration basin.
And I don't have it here, Mike, because this is specifically talking about release rates only. So where we want to incorporate it, I'll touch on that a little bit later. And again, it ties into the post-construction best management practices section that we did a year ago, or anybody remember at this point?
And is that all new language also?
This right here, yes.
I know that is, but I meant the stuff about the 4-bay, is that all new language?
That's new language we wrote previously.
A year ago?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or it should be in there. I was going back and was trying to put everything.
I don't think we got the specificity of a 4-bay, but,
Definitely something we want to add, something we want to add. So runoff rates and storage volume going into the next section. Again, we want to change the required stormwater storage to stormwater attenuation volume. So it's just, and then whether or not, that percent chart that you're talking about, Mike, right, deleting that because it's no longer part of the equation, and then it's just basically part 2 left over where it's a licensed professional engineer, so it's just simplifying it to have that. And any sections from here on out that don't have red lines, so you're seeing like number 2, 3, 4, 5 here, we tried to work through a lot of that, but it doesn't mean that there potentially you guys don't see something, or we're also planning on coming back and looking at it one more time. So if you do see something somewhere else, please feel free. Otherwise, I'm just gonna go to kind of where the red lines are. So the next one is on page 8 of your packet, above item B, number 5. It is just cleaning up some language to indicate, so any regulated development that results in impervious area exceeding the design parameters of an existing stormwater management system in this case, because again, we're allowing green infrastructure, so it's not just detention or infiltration facilities. Part D was talking about stormwater management facilities, which has a definition. The definition is detention and infiltration, that's it. So again, we want to change this to systems to incorporate a lot of the other green infrastructure in there. So a lot of this cleanup is related to removing facilities, to stormwater management system, or stormwater storage to stormwater attenuation. So that's what we have in 1 and small bullet point item number 2. Bullet point item number 3, we discussed the 72-hour drawdown, and in previous discussions, it felt like it was for detention basins to be able to grow vegetation. So we modified that a little bit to specifically speak towards that, because if you're doing other green infrastructure, you know, if you're doing a wetland area or a native garden, you don't necessarily want it to dewater in 72 or whatever the design parameters might be. So we changed that to specifically detention basins, and we gave this or, if you can't meet that, give us your vegetative maintenance plan and establishing performance standards as part of that, as a way out. Because I know that in some cases now we see calculations where it's hard to deal with that. So we don't necessarily want to try to find a workaround, we just want to speak directly to why this is in here. It's establishing vegetation, so as long as you have a solution to deal with those longer inundation times, maybe it's looking at different species and things like that, then that's fine. So that was the idea behind the modification of 3. Part 4, again, it's just the stable overflow is for that detention infiltration. So we wanted to change it that when it's required, such as a detention basin, then you're doing it. You know, we haven't thought of all the different scenarios, but if you're incorporating multiple features, then there could be overflows related. So it's not just detention facilities necessarily. So we wanted to open it up, but give that. And I want to be clear with the verbiage here. I ran through this in like a couple of days and just put it down. So if we need to fine tune a lot of it, by all means. And just, you know, throwing in like such as a detention basin was just my way of relaying that idea. Then moving on to page 9, again, cleaning up part 5 for talking about the freeboard. It might not just be related to, you know, it might be related to other types of whatever B&P that you're using, so it's adding that in. Part 6, again, stormwater management facilities, talking about systems, and then I highlighted those 2 sections as a discussion point of, do we want them, do we not want them? Is notification already happening? I don't know. I guess it was just, we looked at those sections and you know, in terms of a criteria. So something to think about as part of this process. The, you know, downstream property owner, a lot of this was slated to this offsite outfall component that you can see is completely removed. So does the notification have to happen if the outfall is no longer a concern? Maybe we keep it. So, I don't know, staff just kind of looked at it, we went back and forth, and, you know, it felt like it was more tied to, again, this outfall aspect.
Can you go back to 8 about the drainage district?
This one here?
Yeah.
Yes.
I would say that that should read that they notify the drainage district if you're within the district boundaries, not if you're in the watershed. It would be my comment, because, you know, the district boundaries are much different than the watershed typically.
True, but what if you're outside draining into a district? And
they don't have any control over what happens outside their boundaries.
no, I understand that, but it's just giving them notification that they're gonna be receiving drainage into their district type of thing. So it's no different than, you know, the adjoining downstream property owners. The district might be an adjoining downstream property owner. I guess to your point, Are they separated by 4 or 5 property owners?
So there's nothing in there that gives district or limits the developer if the district says, hey, don't do that.
I don't think so. Again,
Okay.
this was in here already, and it felt like it was a kind of prelude to some of this off-site outfall, like, hey, there's a development coming in, they're gonna need to do some improvements, and it's running through your drainage district. The idea behind the new requirements, since we're looking at existing tributary areas, trying to maintain them, and the release rates are working off of that, theoretically, we shouldn't be running into a situation where we have a combined tributary areas and are releasing more in proposed conditions than we are in the existing. In theory, now that's where Darren and Lillian, and they're gonna start looking at some of these and seeing, does it hold true, and maybe we need to revisit this, but yes, and this is why I highlighted it. We don't really have any more planned unit developments or subdivisions. We probably should keep it, could one come up, sure, so, it was just a discussion and whether or not we wanna modify it, or we can rope it into one and just say, if you're within a certain radius, you gotta notify downstream owners to just simplify it, so that's gonna capture the drainage districts, it's gonna capture your MCCDs, your DOTs,
I was thinking that was right through why we had that. It's good to have notice for MCCD whenever they're chasing.
Yeah.
Property.
Right, which, that's maybe simplifying it to all property owners, not just drainage districts, might be appropriate. So that was the discussion. Ernest, thoughts?
On the drainage district, if it stays, you may want to add active. And the only reason I say this, most people are aware of the solar farm that went in on Route 14, in between Woodstock and Crystal Lake on the north side of the road. There was to be another one on the south. And we got contacted because it came back around and they kept pointing at me, I'll know. There was a covenant in the property on the south that said the Nunda Drainage District must give permission. And Nunda Township at one time had a drainage district, but it no longer exists, and Nunda Township won't even acknowledge it exists, so they weren't able to get that permission. So there are 43 drainage districts I know in the county, of which 3 are active. All could be active tomorrow if the board so took action. But if all of a sudden someone says, well, you have to notify the drainage district, and it doesn't exist actively, how do you prove you notified something that is etherware right now? And it doesn't, so I'd add inactive if I were you.
The other thing too is, in both of these, it's stormwater management facilities, as I pointed out, if you look at that definition, it's detention basins and infiltration basins. So this is also meant to read, well, if you're only doing a detention basin, this is when you need to notify them. So that's another part of the cleanup, I guess, and, I don't know, I mean, just trying to get feedback. I think maybe combining it or simplifying it, that if you are gonna do a detention basin, it's probably a good notification, but if you're not doing a detention basin because you're taking some of these other green infrastructure practices into account, do you not have to notify them? It's still runoff, right? So should it be stormwater management system versus facility? Should we have the notification? I don't know. There's a specific call out to planned unit developments and subdivisions. We haven't done one of those in the county in a long time. So maybe it's specific to those type of operations where if it's, someone doing something else, maybe it's not required. And I don't know what are we trying to get out of the notification component, I guess, just to make them aware. From that perspective, I would say, maybe we just do agencies such as drainage districts, MCCD, DOTs, so that they're aware. I don't know that it needs to extend to every single property owner, right? I don't know. That was kind of the thought process was, do we need what's the justification behind the notification? Should we open it up to everyone, or should we keep it to select entities, just so they're aware?
Bruce, would you guys want to know or not?
Yes,
Yes? So you would want to know.
because that happened in Hebron when they did that subdivision there south of town.
That's
All that water comes down 47 now and it ends up in the tile, and then when the state redid
They
that,
did the curve there, yeah, they blew it and it
they
became a,
pumped it
it
from
became a
there
wetland.
over into the drain tile and then flooded out the downstream landwaters.
So we'll keep it, and maybe I'll simplify it to drainage districts, MCCD, those type of entities, DOT. Okay.
So what about all the inactive drainage districts? I guess the question is,
And I'll keep
Is it-
active.
right.
Active, yeah, active.
Yeah, I wrote that down.
Because if it's inactive, it just, you can't notify, there's nobody to say.
Great point.
Yeah, there,
Thank you for bringing
I
that
mean,
up.
yeah.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, because there probably isn't a contact person if it's in
No,
it.
there isn't, there isn't, unless,
or if
unless
there
they-
is, they might be dead, because it was,
Or it could
80
still
years
be
ago.
just like a, I don't know what you want to call it, a group of guys get together, they're calling it an actual drainage district, but they're not assessing taxes. They're just taking
not
care of it
official.
on their own.
Right, it's not official, right.
No, it's a great point. I mean, even with old graveyards, we run into, there's just nobody to contact.
Right.
And if that's a requirement, then you can't overcome that obstacle. So really good point.
Okay. All right, so eliminated, this whole section related to concentrated discharges. There is a later section that somewhere in here discusses that it needs to be, you need to have the flow dissipation, whether through a level spreader or some type of practice. It's somewhere in here, I'll find it, apologize. But we're basically removing that, and then the off-site outfall, again, the theory is with the new changes, that no longer should be an issue, because you're gonna have reduced flow rates going downstream. So as mentioned, we'll have the folks with the interns dig into that and give us better feedback. Looks like I forgot to remove that. And then detention facilities, this was a section we did not dig into. Online detention, we did not dig into. Again, areas we want to dig into, just didn't have time. Same thing with number 4, detention within waters and isolated wetlands. Again, infiltration facilities is referenced here. This is where we probably add in, so there's already a pre-treatment component to it. We probably, again, maybe revise that section a little bit.
On the
Yeah.
wetlands of the US, or waters of the US, excuse me, do we need to now work on modifying that because the definition also changed?
Yeah, this is something that's gonna need to get updated. I just want to be clear in terms of what we were able to get done. We focused on connecting the detention sections, trying to go fully through that, understanding we touch on these later. And then throwing in, this is where we kind of stop, throwing a green infrastructure section that's gonna dig into a lot of those parameters where we can add in slopes and things like that if you're using it as part of stormwater management. So this was gonna be kind of the flow that we were looking at, and I don't know, infiltration facilities maybe gets revised. I don't know that it has its own separate component, maybe it's stormwater management systems in general, so that's kind of the flow we wanted to get feedback as well. Zach, did you have something? Sorry, or something?
No, I can wait until we get further along.
Okay. So this is where we kind of stop, but this is where we would, so this is where it ties into that post-construction best management practices that we did way back when. As a refresher, we want to move towards more of a narrative describing what you're doing on site to confirm if a BMP is needed. And then all of that information, if you're a major development, more than 1 acre, you try to incorporate infiltration. And then we provided that table. That's supposed to, and I don't know if it's table 3, I have to check that, it might be like table 8 or whatever the numbering is. For just potential sources of pollution, what are the pollutants, what are the post-construction BMP treatment options? So this, and then after that, there's the design requirements. So this is where we threw in the infiltration design, shall utilize the sediment forebay. This might need to be worked around, and again, it's supposed to work with that green infrastructure section for tackling the runoff control, and then ties directly into that post-construction BMP management phase. So sorry I jumped around on you guys, but that's really it. I have a couple of definition changes here for major stormwater system, the portion of the stormwater management system needed to meet the runoff reduction rate and post-construction BMP requirements. And then we talked about the simplified method. So that's as far as we were able to get in terms of tying everything together. But you can see how now visually it's meant to work, and we gotta go in and clean up some of these sections and clean up the redundancies. And are we saying separate two things, you know, in separate areas? Should it be moved here or there? It is part of it, but that's kind of the general direction of the SMO. Go ahead.
So glad to hear that the green infrastructure is going to be built out a little bit, because that was one of my questions, is how are we defining that? But then also on page 16 of our packet, it's F5 where it says natural landscaping as an alternative to dirt grass, right at the top of your screen right there. Is it defined somewhere what is meant by natural landscape?
No, and that is probably a section we want to take a look at. I think this hierarchy existed prior, but no.
Where's that?
Right here.
After the table.
Yeah, should that be more like
Natural
native?
landscaping.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
So, like, do you get credit for throwing a bunch of calorie pen in there?
Well, no, that's a great point.
Creative.
And yeah, that is existing language, so we
Yeah,
definitely
so I'm
need
curious.
to correct that.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, that's gonna, again, pair with that green infrastructure section. We wanna have a native vegetation component in there. So then as we go through, you know, does this need to be updated to be consistent with some of that, changing the hierarchy, et cetera. So, yeah, but, you know, that's why we stopped at green infrastructure, was because it lays out detention basin, lays out infiltration basin. But then if you want to use a native garden, if you want to use native vegetation to help lower that curve number, you know, filter strips, et cetera, that's where that would go, and we would provide some of those requirements. Now, a lot of it is outlined. The Illinois Urban Manual does a nice job of outlining a lot of that. So we'd probably be referencing that and maybe just fine tuning that a little bit and, you know, adding some standards. The one aspect after we get through this that we haven't discussed is long-term maintenance. We do want to have something in the ordinance that would give municipalities, whoever, an ability to enforce that maintenance plan. Currently, it's just recorded and it's have a nice day, and then it goes to civil court if there's a dispute. Well, you're not maintaining it, now I'm flooding, whatever that, you know, facility might look like. So we want to make sure that it's going to be something where maintenance can be executable and something that the person can deliver to us as a demonstration that they are keeping up with maintenance. And so this leads into a whole nother discussion that I don't know where it's gonna go, but you know, what we're looking at is potentially having a program. We were part of a pilot program looking at certification for BMPs, green infrastructure. At its current state, that doesn't look like something that we're gonna use. So like if a homeowner wanted to do it, the thought process was, well, okay, maybe they take this course as a way for us to kind of have a higher level of confidence that they'd be able to execute some of this. But it's not at a place that we feel good with it. So they can also hire a contractor. Do we want to try to set up a county program where we can collect payments and then the county uses it's negotiating power to deal with some contractors, make them available. Those are the type of things, and then if you don't do maintenance, that's where it can get a little bit in the gray of you're not meeting it versus you are, especially if we don't make it black and white or as black and white as possible. Assessing fines and issuing violations is gonna be difficult from an implementation perspective. So just something to think about. I know the municipalities are already tackling this with SSAs and God knows what, but Lake County is developing HOA workshops, and so maybe it's trying to develop guidelines, use information that's already out there to just make sure that whatever they want to implement as part of stormwater management is maintained long-term, and that there's confidence that they can do it. We'll have something for if the ag side is already implementing NRCS measures that are approved and things like that don't necessarily, we need to get involved if they're already following USDA practices. We've already got that written in here, but that would be the idea for the long-term success. We certainly don't want to have someone come in and say, okay, I'm gonna put in 2 acres of natives to offset my impervious area to decrease my flow rate, and then they don't maintain that.
Oh, ragweed.
Whatever it is, right? And so we already have some performance standards with the solar farm and things like that, and part of it is the county needs to set itself up for the eventual tracking of these and things like that, which we feel confident we can do. But just to give you guys an idea, once we get there, the last step would be really trying to crack the maintenance aspect of all of this. Maybe we start with something real simple and see how that works, and then go from there. I don't necessarily think we're gonna find the answer right away, but once we put the ordinance together, we're gonna know how it functions. You guys can see how everything kind of comes full circle, at least everything's meant to work together. So maintenance will just be another element of that. And we are mindful that if we throw some of these on, that municipalities might not be suited for this. So we certainly will develop in a way that it's gonna be based on that maintenance agreement. So that maintenance agreement can vary from municipality to municipality. So that we're not saying, for the county, we wanna see an annual report. Municipality might be saying, whoa, we're not gonna be able to do that. Well, then whatever that maintenance agreement looks like with the municipality, then they can enforce it as they need, or however they want to write that, and that gives that flexibility to kind of bring it full circle. So,
is that going to be, is that going to somehow be tracked and presented to you for when the municipalities come up for their recertification as implementers? I mean, so the expression in the military was gun deck. Just so they're not gun decking, going, yeah. They turn in a piece of paper and you go, oh, they got it all here, we're done. Or are they gonna actually have to prove, we really did this?
I think for the maintenance component, I think I'm just gonna really leave that up to the municipalities. I think for the certification, we just wanna make sure that all the standards, like the annual report that you're gonna get, that I'm gonna email out those certifications soon. If I don't have your annual report, that's gonna be my way of holding that. We just wanna make sure it's being reviewed and things like that. So, and it's gonna be difficult on a case-by-case basis, whether you're dealing with an HOA to do the maintenance or single owner, and you're gonna have, something we were talking about with Scott and just in terms of soil erosion control. One thing I should mention that we want to add that we're discussing right now is potentially pre-construction meetings on sites that are adjacent to water bodies or wetlands, just so we avoid issues, to have kind of sign off for that. But no matter what you do, you're gonna have repeat offenders. And so if a municipality is having a really hard time with someone, I feel like that would, do you really want to have that bar where, hey, municipality, you're not managing the maintenance of these facilities, because they haven't been managed forever. So in our viewpoint, just having this and giving them an opportunity is gonna be a step up, and maybe we can look at it again, or maybe the next version of us in 15, 20 years can reassess and throw some higher standards, right? So, no, I wouldn't for this part.
So there's probably some people in here who are like working for communities that are in Cook County, right, under MWRD review. They require communities to audit their own BMPs, do they not? I think it's in the language, I don't know if it's happening, I guess it's just a question more than anything.
Does this audit the BMPs that they've permitted or that they've?
Yeah, like they're supposed to verify that the storage is there in those BMPs, cause it's like, right, it's supposed to store the first about a half inch, 3/4 inch, whatever, that storage remains. And I don't know what the interval is, but 5 years or 2 years or whatever, but there's supposed to be some sort of audit process to verify those BMPs are being maintained from a volumetric standpoint.
I know that MWRD has somebody on staff that's doing inspections of those.
They have a person that's doing those on behalf of the village or their
No.
own?
Behalf of MWRD, because
Okay.
that's supposed to be going to meet their permit, you know, their NPDS Phase 1 program.
Okay, but the communities would be on the hook, I believe, to do their own.
I'm not sure about that.
I'm not aware of that. I'm thinking of like the Schedule Rs that you would submit there that would show where the BMPs and stormwater systems are on a site. I don't think that puts any responsibility on the community.
Yeah,
At least it might, but I'm just not aware of it.
Okay.
I'm not either.
Check that. So you think it's just specific to MWRD facilities?
No, it's part of the, process for certified communities, so the communities that are approved, there's not that many communities that are approved to do their own permitting.
Oh, okay, I see.
But, so MWRD goes out and gets copies of all that stuff and does inspections to make sure things are still working.
In those communities?
Yeah,
So they're doing it on behalf of those communities?
they're doing it because they want to make sure those are still in place.
Okay.
They're not doing it for the community, they're doing it for their own program.
In that case, I mean, you know, it's because they're combined sewer system, they're looking to
That's right.
reduce every drop of water
That's
that they
right.
can.
It's a CSO related.
That's correct,
Yeah.
that's correct.
I think it's related to their consent decree.
Yes,
They have a consent decree with the US EPA for that.
yeah.
We can still look at if there's
Same
language,
thing,
if there's
at the end of the
language
day,
that can
someone's
be
looking
drawn.
I guess.
Yes, yeah, obviously we do wanna have an audit process, make sure all our communities are doing what they need to do. And, once, I think we wanna zero in on what we wanna do for maintenance first, and then, I am mindful, I've already had this communicated from the municipality that, hey, we're not set up to track maintenance. It's like, I get it, we'll have to find a way, and that's why I think that maintenance agreement or maintenance plan is gonna be reflective on a case-by-case basis between the two entities, whether you're dealing with the county or that individual municipality. The municipality then can have an ability to say, well, we can do it every 5 years with the staffing and everything that we have, and that's the best that we can do. I don't wanna force them into an annual inspection process. So,
There's also a lot of communities that have taken on the responsibility from those HOAs.
Right.
When they probably didn't think that through properly, and so now they're on the hook for a lot of maintenance. They never really.
right, and then that's a whole nother situation. Are you guys policing yourselves? I don't know. Yes.
Definitely not.
And this ties into the idea of the watershed planning. I have that as a nice bullet point. But I have a couple of things. I know it's probably getting on the time frame, and I can bump up the flood component and the watershed planning to next agenda. If there's no more comments here, I think we have a lot of good information. Staff will come back and keep working on this to present it, but I can jump into the next part of the agenda if there's no more comments to 7.1 and 7.2. So, and then I'll jump to 7.2 first. So that ties into the watershed planning update that we're looking to do. Part of it is maintenance, and I don't have any, there's no more attachments, so, but it's related to watershed projects having a long 10-year commitment maintenance component as part of those. And as part of that, it's analyzing existing detention basins and making sure that those are up to snuff. So that maintenance component, again, full circle ties into bringing funding in to do projects and help people fund projects. Then we have to keep up with maintenance, otherwise in 20 years, we're right back to the same issues, right? So just tying that together. Now for watershed planning, we do have our RFP for the most part. We are gonna be touching that up and starting to do some outreach with our Huntleys and, you know, in the Kishwaukee, and we might do kind of a broad introduction in general to everyone, just letting them know what it is. So all our municipalities understand, and then focusing on the Kishwaukee side more so. So hopefully, if you're involved with that, you'll be seeing some emails here in the next couple of weeks, but maybe a few weeks would be more accurate. And then I just wanted to share with everyone on our website, we did, for the April flooding event, we do have an inundation map. You can find that if you just go to our government page. There is a flood information headquarters. It is housed in the road closure section. So that was the big use out of it, was this was full of road closures. But in the bottom right is a layers button, and we have all the flood photos that we went out to do. So this on an inundation, and you can click on any one that you want, photo pops up. So the inundation levels were based on looking at these water levels and then going back and looking at the corresponding topo and creating these areas. That's how this was based. So if you want, this is all available. The flood event is right in the middle, basically, of the 10 and 50-year storms, so around the 20, 25-year storm. The interesting thing is, and this is maybe due to the outdated BFE studies, when you get to kind of Chapel Hill Road down through these bridge areas, it actually looks more like a 10-year storm. Through those areas, when you get into these areas, it looks closer to the 50-year storm. Like these were Holiday Hills, this little area, Orchard Heights, this roadway. I'll just show you guys a quick picture.
I would say the 50-year flood level as opposed to the 50-year storm.
Right, yeah, the 2.5% storm, yeah, you're right, Mike, I'm so caught up to using that terminology that, so these people were using a boat to get in and out, to give you guys an idea. And then when you get down to the Algonquin area, it was back down to more of a 10-year event in here. So this was about the worst. And Brad, I don't know, I didn't go everywhere. I think this was the worst of it. So I had a picture. So this was cresting, and then this was I think 2 to 3 days prior to the crest.
We're the enforcement officer for Fox Lake, and so we did a Log Pearson 3 analysis on the chain flood level, and it was right at the 25-year level.
Yeah, I don't know why. Like, it's interesting when you look at like the McHenry area and things like that. If you look at the elevations compared to the FIS studies,
right.
It comes down closer to the 10 in that area. But IDNR has a model that's publicly available. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers did it for the Stratton Dam. There is a cutoff on it, but their model, and my conversations with them was pretty decent compared to ours, and they were seeing, I think they said a 22, so they were getting even specific on it. But they're looking, in my coordination with them, they're looking to do a story map for all that information, so I send them all my flood data, all our drone data. We were gonna do a write-up, but since they're doing it, and I don't know where they're at, but they also have interest in coming into the watershed planning and developing that floodplain model even further. Their model relies on bathymetry data, so their model cuts off like somewhere around here, I wanna say, I forget where exactly. I think the cutoff is like right around here because they don't have that additional bathymetry, but they're getting that, so just wanted to let you guys know. If you want access to that, you don't have access to the model itself, but they did provide, as every day of the storm event hit, you can see what their model was showing. So in coordination with them, I had about an hour-and-a-half meeting with those guys, and it was pretty consistent after we kind of took a look at it, so. If you forget where the link is, email me, I'll send it to you. If you want to look at the pictures, we have a lot more data and things like that aren't here, but I just wanted to kind of give you guys an idea of what that event looked like in April, in case, and I don't know what it looked like in the Kish and upper areas of the Nipperson. I'm not sure. We focused on the Fox mainly.
So the communities were asked to submit information, I think, to DNR. Did you guys get that, or how did that?
Yeah, DNR, yes, a form, yes, they are going around taking damage assessment surveys. So if you do want to get in on that, or if you're a community and you want more information, let me know. I'll dig up the emails and get you in touch with that. They were supposed to send me links to a lot of that. They haven't. They get it. It's DNR. They got a lot of stuff, so I haven't reconnected. But depending on how much time it takes them to do it, we may do a story map ourselves. Which, if you're not familiar with the story map, is just a website, if you will, where you kind of scroll through, and as you scroll, the images changes, the videos changes, so it's at your own pace type of thing. So they indicated they're doing that, so I'm like, I don't want to duplicate our efforts. We have enough going on, but as I learn more, you can reach out to me and I can get you.
So the story maps are our GIS-based product, and I always explain it as kind of between a textbook and a presentation. And whoever's designing it will dictate how it goes, but it allows you to have much more interaction between the text and the various images that are being shown. Really a pretty powerful tool for communicating information.
So with that, just a quick announcement here, moving through the agenda. If you are a person that has your term ending this year, you want to continue, I will be sending some emails. The MCSC is going to target September, their September meeting, so that's going to be, I think, the 24th. If you do want to continue on, it'll be kind of a similar process. Now, if I have your application from last year, you want to reuse that, that's fine. I don't want to make you do extra work, but it would be coming in again and filling those seats. And so this would open it up to anyone not currently here. Lillian, I know you like to come, so this is also a pitch if you want to actually, be more involved. And this is outdated. I need a alternate from you, and I've updated this with Alex, so apologies for that, but just want to make that announcement to think about if you want to continue, if you're up. With that, if nobody has anything else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Anybody? First by